Welcome back, everyone, to another exploration in our Wisdom of the Church Fathers series.
Great to be back.
Today, we're turning our attention to Papias of Hierapolis. He's a really fascinating figure, kind of bridging that gap between the apostles and the later Christian thinkers in the early 2nd century.
Absolutely. And for theological students, I think understanding this early period is just crucial. Papias, he's considered one of the Apostolic Fathers.
Right. That's an important distinction, isn't it? Different from the broader group of church fathers.
Exactly. These are the figures who were, well, much closer in time to the apostles, maybe even direct disciples or people who heard them teach.
So their writings give us a more almost immediate feel for the early church.
Precisely. A really valuable, almost firsthand glimpse. Later fathers are writing in a different world, really. And these apostolic fathers like Papias, they touched on everything.
Like what specifically?
Oh, church structure, ethics, how they worshiped, daily Christian living, and, importantly for Papias, their views on the end times eschatology.
Okay. And even though we only have fragments of Papias's work left,
Which is a shame, but yeah.
those fragments are still incredibly significant, aren't they? They offer these unique insights into beliefs, practices, and especially those eschatological hopes.
Definitely. And you have to remember his likely connection, or at least the traditional connection, to the Apostle John. And he was Bishop of Hierapolis in Asia Minor.
Right, that adds weight.
It does. It underscores why his perspective is so important for tracking how early Christian thought developed. So our aim today, really, is to sift through these fragments, glean what wisdom we can, and try to connect with that early church experience.
Okay, let's do it. Where should we start? How about his method? How did Papias actually gather his information?
Well, right off the bat, in Fragment 1, he's quite honest. He admits he wasn't a direct eyewitness, didn't hear the apostles himself.
Which is interesting. Like you said, he's upfront about it.
Very. Instead, what you see is this real commitment to finding and recording what people who had known the apostles were saying. He calls them the elders.
So relying on that next generation, the ones who learned directly.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is his explicit preference for the living and abiding voice over a book.
The living voice, meaning oral tradition.
Yeah. In a time when written stuff was becoming more common, he still valued that direct person-to-person transmission. He felt it had more immediacy, more authenticity,
That really highlights the importance of eyewitness accounts and oral history in that very early period.
Totally. And he wasn't vague about it. He specifically mentions asking about what Andrew, Peter, Philip, Thomas, James, John, Matthew had said, and also what Origen and the presbyter John taught. He was trying to be thorough.
Seems quite methodical, actually, gathering from multiple reliable streams.
Right. Okay, so moving to the second fragment. This one's a bit different. It gives insight into how early Christians sometimes talked about each other.
How so?
Well, Papias and Clement of Alexandria mentions this too. Apparently, they sometimes called people with godly guilelessness children.
Children, not literally, presumably.
No, it wasn't about age. It seems to have been about valuing that kind of spiritual simplicity, innocence, maybe trust, like embodying a childlike faith.
Ah, okay, so it's a compliment, signifying purity of heart.
That seems to be the idea. It suggests maybe a close-knit community where those qualities were really recognized and valued, almost like a family nickname, but with spiritual weight.
Interesting glimpse into their community values. Now, Fragment 3. This one takes a darker turn, doesn't it? It deals with Judas.
Yeah, it does. The description of Judas's death is, it's quite graphic, very visceral.
What does that tell us? About their moral thinking, perhaps?
Well, it likely functioned as a pretty stark warning, a vivid illustration of what they saw as the consequences of, ultimate betrayal and impiety.
So a cautionary tale, essentially.
Very much so. It reflects an early, maybe less complex view of divine justice. Turn away so drastically, and the consequences are severe. It hammered home the importance of loyalty and faithfulness.
Right. Okay, let's move into Fragment 4. This is where we get into Papias's eschatology, which is probably what he's most famous or infamous for.
Definitely the most discussed part of his work. He lays out this really detailed picture of the future kingdom. And he says he got it from the elders who heard it from John.
And the imagery is just, wow, very specific.
Incredibly specific. He talks about vines with thousands of branches, each branch with thousands of clusters, each cluster thousands of grapes, and each grape yielding huge amounts of wine.
That's almost unbelievably abundant.
Exactly. And it's similar for wheat, apples, seeds, grass. Everything is hyperproductive. What's striking is how well, earthly, it sounds.
Yeah, it's very tangible, not purely spiritual.
Right. It's a renewed creation, just overflowing with fertility and peace. Even the animals, change lions eating straw, everything living in harmony, subject to humans.
Peaceable kingdom.
Pretty much. And Papias apparently recounts Jesus saying something like, "They shall see who shall come to them." In response to Judas's disbelief about all this, it suggests this very physical, restored creation was a powerful hope for them.
Especially if they were facing hardship or persecution.
You'd imagine so. And he explicitly links this vision back to Old Testament prophecy, doesn't he?
Yeah, he mentions Isaiah the wolf lying down with the lamb.
Which is significant in itself. It shows this early attempt to ground their future hope in the scriptures they already had, finding continuity between the promises.
Okay, so building on that future hope, Fragment 5 talks about different levels of reward in the afterlife.
That's right. Again, drawing from the presbyters, or elders, he speaks of different abodes, heaven, paradise, and the city, different levels of glory.
And how are these levels determined?
He seems to link them to the fruitfulness of a person's life on earth. He uses that parable imagery, the 100-fold, 60-fold, 30-fold return.
So interpreting Jesus's words, "In my Father's house are many mansions."
Seems to be an early take on that, yeah. The idea being that your reward, your place, somehow corresponds to your spiritual effort and growth here.
Interesting. Does he say more about the afterlife experience?
He talks about a kind of spiritual ascent, through the Spirit to the Son, then to the Father. So it's dynamic, a progression. And he also mentions the ultimate future, all things subjected to the Father after the Son's reign, even death being destroyed.
And that curious bit about the righteous maybe not even dying during the kingdom time?
Yeah, that's in there too. The idea that the just man on earth forgets to die, basically, during that millennial kingdom. Lots to unpack there.
Definitely. Okay. Fragment 6 seems to bring us back to his sources and methods, but also includes some specific traditions he recorded.
Right. He doubles down, really, saying he got apostolic sayings from companions of the apostles, and he personally heard Aristian and the presbyter, John.
Reinforcing his credentials, so to speak.
Exactly. And this, he felt, gave authority to the traditions he passed on, including miraculous accounts.
Like raising the dead and someone surviving poison.
Yeah, he records stories like Judas Iscariot drinking poison and being unharmed, and even someone being raised from the dead. He accepted these based on the traditions he'd gathered.
It shows a belief that God's power was still very active, doesn't it?
It does. And crucially, for theological students especially, this fragment also contains his really early comments on how the Gospels of Mark and Matthew came about.
Ah, yes. The traditions about their origins. That's huge.
Absolutely. His account of Mark being Peter's interpreter, writing down Peter's preaching accurately but maybe not in perfect chronological order, that's a really early testimony.
And Matthew compiling the Lord's sayings, originally in Hebrew, which others then translated or interpreted.
Exactly. These little nuggets give us invaluable glimpses into how the Gospels were viewed and transmitted right near the beginning.
And he even knew about other accounts, like the Gospel according to the Hebrews.
Yes, he mentions it, which suggests there were various texts circulating, and the early church was already, perhaps implicitly, starting to discern which ones carry that apostolic weight.
Fascinating. Okay, Fragment 7 is a bit more obscure. Something about angels.
Yeah, this one's a little enigmatic. Papias suggests angels were given charge over the world's arrangement, but they didn't do a great job, and their work came to nothing.
What might that be about?
It's hard to say for sure. It could be an early attempt to explain imperfection or even evil in the world without blaming God directly, maybe pointing to some failure in the angelic realm. It hints at a complex view of spiritual hierarchies.
One to ponder. Fragment 8 is more straightforward, his view on the book of Revelation.
Yes, thankfully clear. He basically affirms the inspiration of Revelation. And the fact that he did so early puts him alongside other key figures who accepted it. It's important evidence for its early reception in the church.
Good point. Helps trace the canon's development. Now, Fragment 9 links Papias with some other early thinkers, Clement, Pantaenus, Ammonius.
Right. And they apparently shared an interpretation of the Genesis creation account. They saw the 6 days as referring allegorically to Christ and the whole church.
So not a literal 6-day interpretation, but a symbolic one.
Seems so. It shows an early tendency to read the Old Testament through Christological lens, looking for deeper spiritual meanings related to Jesus and the church, connecting the dots across Scripture.
Okay. And finally, Fragment 10. This one seems very detailed, trying to sort out the different Marys in the Gospels.
Yes, it's quite meticulous. He lists 4 Marys, Jesus' mother, Mary the wife of Clopas or Alphaeus, Mary the mother of James and John, Zebedee's wife, and Mary Magdalene, and he tries to clarify their relationships and children.
Why go into such detail, do you think?
Probably reflect a desire for accuracy and clarity about the gospel stories. Understanding who was who around Jesus was important for preserving the narrative faithfully, avoiding confusion, basically.
Makes sense. Well, looking back at all these fragments, even though they're scattered, they really do offer so much.
They absolutely do. For theological students, engaging with someone like Papias is invaluable. It connects you right back to the earliest phases of Christian thought and life.
You get insights into their eschatology, the huge role of oral tradition, how they approach scripture, miracles. It's foundational stuff.
And maybe the question to reflect on is this. How does hearing these perspectives from someone living so close to the apostolic age, someone relying on that living voice, how does that shape your own understanding, your engagement with scripture and tradition today?
It definitely encourages critical thinking about where our beliefs and practices originated, doesn't it? Seeing the development from the ground up.
Precisely. His perspective offers a unique lens.
Well, that brings us to the end of this exploration into the fragments of Papias, another part of our Wisdom of the Church Fathers series.
And we really hope you, our listeners, found this useful. We encourage you to look more into the Apostolic Fathers generally. There's just so much wisdom there.
Absolutely. And if you did find this valuable, please do like this video and subscribe to the channel for more insights from the series.
Don't forget to click the notification bell too, so you know when we release new material.
And please share your thoughts, your questions, any reflections you have in the comment section below. We genuinely enjoy reading them and interacting with you there.
We do. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.